Hello, I'm Chinta Stausberg, host of the Strausberg Report, and I've been with the PCC network for about 15 years now. One of my most interesting subjects that I interviewed was a man by the name of Barack Obama. He was then Illinois Senator, so that's been a few years ago. When I met him, I thought, this is a different man. He's of a different breed, and he seems to be honest and sincere. And he was looking for a change. Anytime someone's looking for a real change, my eyes just perk up, and I'm really very interested. And I was very interested in him. When we talked, he told me about his background, where he was born, his parents, his dreams. And I'm so happy to have been one of the first to interview him on the PCC network in the Chicago area, because after that, it seems like everybody wanted to interview this very interesting man with this very strange name. So I'm honored and thankful to Reverend Harold Bailey, who heads the PCC network, for allowing me to bring then Illinois Senator Barack Obama into the PCC network and ultimately into the United States and the entire world. And it began right here at PCC Network. I'm Chinta Stausberg. Thank you. Today is Democratic Illinois Senator Barack Obama from the 13th Senatorial District. Senator Obama is a graduate from the Harvard Law School. He joined the law firm of Minor, Barnhill, and Gallen, where he specialized in voting and employment rights cases. And Senator Obama is also a senior lecturer at the University of Chicago Law School. Senator, welcome to the Strausberg Report.
Happy to be here. Thank you very much.
Okay. Now, you've been in office how long?
I've been in office for 6 years now. I was elected in 1996, and the 13th Legislative District is located in the mid-south portion of Chicago. Takes in communities like Hyde Park, South Shore, and then runs west, although this year, this is a redistricting year across the nation, across Illinois and here in Chicago, and so my district boundaries have changed, and I'll mostly have the lakefront all the way from 99th Street South, all the way up through the Gold Coast in the Loop.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So you're the senator for Hyde Park now?
So I'm currently the senator for Hyde Park and South Shore, but right now my district goes through areas like Englewood. My new district will be having some of the wealthiest communities in the state as well as some of the poorest communities in the state. And so, you know, it's a real mix, which I think is makes it an interesting district to represent.
That's going to be a challenge,
It will be, because there'll be so many different interests that people have in the district.
Okay. Barack Obama, what kind of name is that? It's different.
It is different. My father was from Kenya, from Africa, and so Barack means one who's blessed in Swahili. And my father was one of the first Kenyans and part of that generation of Africans in the early 60s, right around independence in Africa, that came to the United States to study. So he was a university student here. He met my mother. They married. They actually met in Hawaii, which is where I was born, because he got a scholarship to go to the University of Hawaii.
Wait a minute now. You're part African.
Right.
And you were born in Hawaii.
I was born in Hawaii.
How fascinating.
Yeah, and in fact, my grandmother still lives there. My mother and father are both passed. But that gives me an interesting background, because I still have cousins and brothers who live in Kenya on the continent, and that makes me, I think, a little more interested in international affairs as well as local and domestic politics.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And when did you come to Chicago?
Well, what happened was I'd gone to Columbia University in New York City, and I'd gotten my degree in political science. And while I was on campus, I was very active in a number of student movements at the time. One of the main things that we were doing was anti-apartheid movement back in the early 80s. You'll recall we were trying to get a lot of these universities and corporations to divest from South Africa.
Absolutely.
And so I was very active in the divestment movement. on campus, and I also, because Columbia University is located right next to Harlem, became active and interested in community affairs in Harlem. And so I decided that after I got out of college that I'd be interested in spending some time working as a community organizer. I worked in Harlem for 6 months, basically recruiting students out of the City College of New York system. They have a campus up in Harlem to work in the community on behalf of various community programs.
So you were a rebel.
I was, and still am.
Hard
I
to
hope.
imagine.
Still am. I hope. But and then I came to Chicago because there were a group of churches out in the far south side of Chicago. In fact, in this area near Olive Harvey, Roseland, West Pullman, Oggill Gardens, and they had been struggling with how to redevelop the community at a time when a lot of the steel mills were closing up and down the lake area here. There was a lot of racial turnover. Whites were moving out, blacks moving in. The school systems were having problems. There were a lot of foreclosures. And so the churches came together and they decided that they'd like to do something about it, and they didn't have that much money, so the only person they could afford to hire was a young student out of college. And so I drove to Chicago, not knowing anybody in Chicago, but being interested in working on urban problems, and ended up directing the project, which was called Developing Communities Project, and in fact still exists out in this area. I was sort of the founder and director of that organization, and we set up job training programs. We set up college tutorial programs and counseling programs for students in high school. We renovated playgrounds. We worked on city services. It was a wonderful experience. I got a terrific education from it, and really learned Chicago and made this place my home through that process.
But then how did you get from being an activist here in Chicago now to being an elected official?
Well, what happened is that after about 3.5 years of working at the grassroots level as a community organizer, I started realizing that a lot of the problems that we were dealing with couldn't be dealt with just at the neighborhood level. You know, if you were talking about unemployment or how the school system was working or drugs and crime, then it was critical that you had a comprehensive approach. And a lot of the decisions that were being made were not being made in the neighborhood. They were being made downtown at City Hall, or they were being made at the state level. And so I decided that I needed a little bit more education. That's when I went back to law school. I went to Harvard on the East Coast, got my degree. When I came back, I knew that I didn't want to go into a big corporate law firm and do that track. So what I did was I took a year to direct Project Vote. You'll remember back in 1992, Clinton was the nominee. Carol Moseley Braun had just been nominated for the U.S. Senate race, and so I took on the task of registering African American, Hispanic, and low-income voters on a nonpartisan basis, but making sure that they were participating in that election. We ended up registering 150,000 new voters that year, which is still, I think, a record for metropolitan Chicago area in terms
just
of
this one organization?
just this one organization, Project Vote.
In what time frame are we talking about?
You know, about, I guess, over about 6 to 9 months, we were able to put together a coalition, not only of a lot of the existing civic groups like NAACP, Operation Push, and a lot of the block clubs and ward organizations, but one of the things that really made it work well was we got some wonderful help from Sawsheen. The Gardeners participated. They helped put together a whole media package, and we ran advertising on GCI and VON and a number of the major urban radio stations in town.
Like they did in '82.
That's exactly
for the
right.
'83 mayoral race.
That's exactly right. And you know, so we were very successful, and that introduced me, I think, to the side of elected politics that I hadn't been involved with as a community organizer. So I continued to practice, started teaching law at the University of Chicago, When this state Senate seat became vacant in 1995, some supporters and friends of mine asked me if I'd be interested in running. I decided to give it a shot and was fortunately successful.
Now, as a state senator, what do you do? A lot of people don't really know that that is the seat of power down there because we're so focused on City Hall.
Right. Well, I think that's a good point. I think people in Chicago really focus on their alderman, because the alderman is the person who, on a day-to-day basis, if their trash isn't being picked up or snow isn't being plowed, that's who they call.
Front line of defense.
But in terms of policy making, in terms of government decisions that have the most profound impact on people's lives long term, state government is probably where most of the action is. You know, people know who their alderman is. A lot of times they know who their congressman is because of C-SPAN, and a lot of what happens at the national level makes the nightly news. But in Springfield, in state government, that's where decisions are made about public school financing. That's where all the criminal laws are written and enforced. That's where most of healthcare policy is made at the state level. Almost all the human services that people rely on, whether it's for the disabled, the elderly, the mentally challenged, children who are in foster care, all those programs are essentially run through the state level. And so I've been really encouraged by my capacity to influence policy at the state level, and I think it's a wonderful place for people to really make a big difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now the city's budget is like $4 billion with a B. Right. What is your budget?
We just finished budget negotiations and sent a $53 billion budget to the state of Illinois. The state of Illinois is obviously one of the 10 largest states in the country. It's got an enormous budget. A large portion of that money goes to education. The state, although it doesn't pay as big of a share for public education as it should, still pays a large chunk of money to education. We spend a lot of money on Medicaid, the primary program for health care for the poor. The state matches federal monies to make that program solvent. We have a significant amount of money going into the correction system and prisons. Unfortunately, that's been a growing portion of the state budget, which I think is, from a policy perspective, is a mistake, but nevertheless that's there. And then we have all the other state programs that are up and running.
What's the percentage of the corrections?
Well, right now I would say it's about 7 to 8% of the budget, but it's a growing ratio of the budget. During the 90s, there was a huge explosion in prison construction across the country, and with that also the need to hire prison guards. The primary driving force behind it has been the draconian drug laws that have been instituted both at the federal level and at the state level. The huge growth primarily results from nonviolent drug offenders. And one of the things that I've been very active on down in Springfield is working on issues of juvenile justice and trying to make sure that more of the state resources go into prevention and intervention programs as opposed to incarceration strategies. But that's been a difficult fight because politics in Springfield is driven by people's perceptions, at least, of what voters want. And the perception down in Springfield is that being tough on crime, even if it's not very smart on crime, is a winning recipe to win elections. So that's an ongoing debate and an ongoing struggle that we've been involved with.
It may win elections, but it's costing taxpayers a lot of money to house how many? 30,000 or so?
That's exactly right, and a growing proportion. Obviously, the African American community and the Latino community is shouldering the biggest brunt of this, because it's our youth who are going into the system.